Hello, this is Rachel Babin from Oncology News Australia. Welcome to another episode of the OJC Meets, the sister series of the Oncology Journal Club podcast. Today, Eva Segeloff and Craig Underhill chat with Grant McArthur. Grant is head of the Molecular Oncology Lab at Peter Mac and executive director of the Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre. This episode covers the anticipated surge in cancer diagnoses resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic, Grant's research into melanoma, and his priorities for the VCCC. You'll also find out why he is a bad marsupial. We hope you enjoyed today's entertaining and informative episode. For the latest oncology news and podcast updates, subscribe to the Oncology newsletter for free on oncologynews.com.au. This is Rachel Babin, and this is the Oncology Podcast.
G'day. I've got one of my favourite people with me today, and he's the darling of many people, so not so exclusive, but it's none other than Professor Grant McArthur. Hello, Grant.
G'day, Eva. You're just too kind.
Oh, Grant, we all love you, and we're so proud of your role in many aspects of Australian cancer life. Your groundbreaking work in melanoma, and I believe you've just been named as a top performer in Web of Science citations for the second year in a row.
Yeah, it just came out today, actually, that Web of Science have a list of highly cited researchers, so I made the grade, which is really, though, what that's all about is an amazing journey that I've been able to participate in. I just feel so fortunate. Some fantastic basic scientific discoveries, immune checkpoints and BRAF mutations, and then developing the drugs and being involved on that wave of radical change in the way we treat the patients. And it has been big in oncology and medicine, hence why there's lots of highly cited papers. But really it's all about collaborative research, and my part's only small, but it has been incredible fun, and seeing those patients do so well, not having to use cytotoxic chemotherapy anymore for skin cancer is just amazing.
So, Grant, you're too modest, but as a GI oncologist, we're finally getting there with our MSI-high colorectal cancers. In fact, I've got a project started through Twitter, actually, with some people who answered a tweet, some international researchers looking at exceptional responders, and for us not to give cytotoxic treatment. I actually feel sorry for oncologists who retired about 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, there's a few things, Eva, that tickle my fancy in that space. And one, of course, is this amazing way that the MS-high tumours now is tumour agnostic. You know, you're seeing activity regardless of the tissue of origin of the tumour, which is fantastic. The thing that really tickles my fancy is, will we get to a point in time where Hodgkin's disease gets treated with anti-PD-1 based immunotherapy as first line rather than cytotoxic chemotherapy? Wouldn't that be an amazing change over 2 generations of oncologists to go from one of the biggest breakthroughs we've had in cancer treatment to then be turned around and replaced by something else? It might happen, which would be so remarkable.
So, Grant, you have had an extraordinary career as a clinician and researcher, but in more recent years as an administrator. So in what ranking would you put those 3 roles, and how have you been so successful at the administration role?
Yeah, look, I might start off with why do it, which I think is interesting, right? Why do you want to be administrator? And when I was interviewed for Executive Director of the Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre, I was asked, why do you want to do it? And the way I think about it is that as a great clinician, really devoted to your patients, through your career, you will help many hundreds of patients, hopefully have a good journey and cure a few people along the way. If you're a great researcher, that's numbers in thousands. But actually, if you can get the cancer system, Eva, working, which I know you're really passionate about, then that has got the potential to really benefit tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And to do that with a scientific base, right, that it's science and research that can lead improvements in outcome for cancer patients and get a cancer system that will support that is really, for me, now a passion and what I'd like to sort of see work well for the rest of my career.
And so, Grant, you have to be very patient. You have to pay lip service. You have to not speak up sometimes, I think. Are these things that you employ as a successful advocate politician? And what are the other tricks?
Yeah, look, Eva, that's a really good point, because as a clinician and a researcher, you're always full of ideas. And, what makes a great clinician is to be decisive and take the bold decisions for your patients and recommend it to them and take them along with you. And it's different when, you have to herd the cats, so to speak, or lead, a number of amazing people. And, you have to learn to back off and listen, because there's so many remarkable people that have devoted their life to cancer care, cancer research, cancer education, so many fantastic ideas and talents that people have. You do have to sit back, listen, and then try to sort of bring people together for the best ideas. And that's critically important, particularly in something as complex as cancer, where obviously we don't have all the answers.
So one thing that I'm quite passionate about is this interstate difference in our health systems. And I think COVID's really brought out the issues of how different states are in many aspects. Do you find that is a major source of variation and disparity in cancer care? And what can we do about that?
Yeah, look, I think you're spot on. We've really learnt strengths and weaknesses in different systems during COVID. It's really interesting being in Victoria, where there is a more devolved model of health service delivery, where you have hospital boards with some direction from Department of Health, but it's a lot more decentralised than any other state. Now, the upside of that is that I think Victoria has really led some real innovations in healthcare, going back to things like GCSF discovery and translating that into practice. There's been so many Nobel laureates have been based in Victoria, and having a health system that can innovate based around that fantastic biomedical science is terrific, and the devolved model helps with that. But when you're facing a crisis like COVID-19 and you need central coordination of response, maybe the Victorian system's got some downsides. And I think it's tremendous, at least on the infectious diseases side of things, just how well, particularly New South Wales, have done with facing a lot of the similar issues to Victoria. And that shows the value of a centralised system. So I think we're going to learn that we need to do things a bit more coordinated and centralised in Victoria and cancer going forward. And really what eats at me, into my heart, Eva, and I think yours as well, is that it's just not right that care a patient gets is having a major influence by where they happen to first interact with the health system. They should get great care anywhere, and we still need to foster that innovation and the great biomedical research translating into better outcomes for patients. So we still need that, but we've got to do better to make sure that no matter where anyone lands in the health system, they're going to get great care. Not easy, but that's what we've got to aspire for. And COVID's taught us, we've seen, a lot of variations in oncology in terms of electronic prescribing of chemotherapy, of the use of urgent symptom review clinics and so forth is just not consistent across the system, which we've really borne out as being a problem during COVID. So we've learned from that, and we need to get more centrally coordinated, I think, in Victoria.
So, Grant, we've talked a little bit about your career and your roles, your passions and your beliefs, but now we want to know a bit about the real Grant. So you're an avid bike rider. Tell us some other interesting facts that not many people know.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've had, as a part of team building with my leadership team at the VCCC, had the session where you tell people something that they won't know about you. And so I'll jump immediately to what I did fairly recently with that, Eva, which is as a young fella at medical school, I was pretty passionate about trying to save the Franklin River down in Tassie when that was a really big issue. And so I sort of cut out of going to a few pathology sessions and things to help out the Wilderness Society back in the 1980s, early 1980s. And I had this angst about should I go down to the Franklin and get arrested and thrown into Risdon jail as a part of the social campaign to save the Franklin. And I was really torn because I thought, maybe I'd get thrown out of medical school if I get arrested and locked up. So I decided not to do it and just to sort of do some volunteer work for Wilderness Society in Victoria. So that was one thing. But no, I love cycling. It's a great getaway, good mateship, very good for the middle-aged body that's failing because there's not much wear and tear on the body, and cycling is a lot of fun. Like Australian rules football and cricket, but don't watch much TV other than sport.
Fantastic. So can I just clarify, did you dress up as a koala and hassle people at the traffic lights for donations?
Yeah, I didn't qualify for the koala suit for some reason. I think I must have been, a bad marsupial.
Fair enough. And so have you ever been arrested for any other reason?
No, only fines for misdemeanours, driving the car. But no, never been arrested or had to front court.
Okay, what's your favourite food?
Oh, that's a challenge because I love Asian food and many different types of Asian food. I love those fresh Thai salads that you get in Thailand where everything is just sort of the flavours are just unbelievable, bit of spice, just love that. Very fond of dumplings from China, anything Asian, and I like it. I'm always talking the family into having, Asian food when we decide to do some Uber Eats.
Fantastic. And who's in your family, Grant? Who's at home with you now?
Well, I have my wonderful partner, Marie, and I have 3 kids. The eldest is actually an intern at Western Health and recently did a surgical term in Mildura that she loved, getting up into the regions, Craig. And was actually sad to leave because she had a great group of colleagues there and was enjoying the medicine once she learnt how to deal with surgeons, which is not easy for interns, but eventually she learnt. And I got 2 other kids that live at home. My son is just completing a Masters of Economics, so he's not into science at all, but it's been really interesting watching him grow up because, he uses R program very proficiently for his economic analysis, which all the bioinformaticians use, so watching him learn that, and it's pretty sophisticated maths they do. And it's interesting, he's actually wonders whether maybe I might do health economics, which I think is pretty cool. And I always say to him that, it's okay being an economist because there's a Nobel Prize in economics.
Ah, fantastic.
Yeah. And my youngest daughter is first year science at Melbourne Uni, not so sure what she wants to do, but doing climate change this year, which she's loving.
Fantastic. I think there's 2 sorts of doctors, those whose kids have gone into medicine and those who haven't. And you can split the room. My 2 daughters did no maths and no science. But I would love to have had a child go into health. It must really give you a special bond.
Yeah, it's important. We're all seeing lots of challenges through COVID, right, with supporting our colleagues. So actually, to be able to be that extra support for my daughter outside of the workplace is, I think she finds, quite useful.
Your daughter's an intern. Does she still ask you for a hand or does she know better than you now?
I think she knows a lot more than me about a number of things, but she does ask me about oncology questions from time to time. So
that's nice.
I thought you were referring to a text I got in the middle of the night from my daughter in England who wrote, "Mum, my boobs are sore. Should I be worried?" Kids always ask for your advice. And I think the paranoia about cancer's passed on by oncologist parents.
Eva, what's your daughter's name?
No, you're going to apologise to her, aren't you? It's the other daughter, not
What's her name?
Noah.
Noah. So again, from the team at the Oncology Journal podcast, we'd like to apologise sincerely for your mother's inappropriate use of an anecdote regarding her children.
Grant, one of the great things about the podcast is we're not sure anyone listens, so we can say whatever we want.
Eva, you've just reminded me of the time I got a phone call from my daughter from Eos in the Greek Isles, where she was feeling short of breath and wanted advice as to what to do in this holiday isle in the Greek Isles. Should she go to the hospital or whatever? I said, yeah, you better go to the hospital. She sounded breathless on the phone talking to her from Greece. So she got assessed after a while when the doctor came into the hospital and said, I'd come back to clinic tomorrow and we'll do some tests. So they had some machine which was for testing for infectious mononucleosis, which they said she had it, which she absolutely did not. And she knew it at the time. She wasn't actually in medical school then, she was in science. And she worked it out that she didn't have infectious mono. And, they wanted to charge €250 for putting a blood sample in this box. So we decided, she wasn't going to do that. And the other Australians in the waiting room said, but the doctor said you've got to have it. You've got to have the test. Anyway, so she worked out not to have that. So that was interesting, dealing with shortness of breath on the phone from the Greek Isles. Interesting things our children get us into, Eva.
They do, and I didn't mean to say anything bad about any of my children not becoming medical. They look at me and go, why would we want to do what you've done? Probably let's leave that there. Over to you, Craig, because we are privileged to be able to talk to Grant about some of his work leading the VCCN and the VCCC and looking at COVID and the impact of COVID on cancer.
So, Grant, the main reason we got you on the show was not to talk about your lycra or your activism in the 80s, and I probably saw you on the same Save the Franklin marches, to be honest. So that was one of the things I miss about the modern world. We don't seem to have protest marches in the street anymore. But the main thing we wanted to talk about was this apparent drop in cancer diagnosis in Victoria in 2020 and the possible post-pandemic surge. So there's been some work from the Victorian Cancer Registry that is being talked about. So do you want to outline some of the data, what's been looked at, what the results are?
Yeah, Craig, it is very concerning, and the bottom line is pretty simple. I think we're going to have greater health impacts from delayed diagnosis of cancer in Victoria than we are from COVID, most likely. So it's a big issue. But what the data is the Victorian Cancer Registry have a really terrific system where when a pathologist signs off a pathology report for cancer, it automatically gets transferred electronically to the registry. And this covers about 94% of pathology reports related to cancer in the state. And what that means is that you can measure these notifications of cancer electronically in almost, it feels like, real time. So there's been a massive reduction in these pathology notifications early in 2020 post-lockdown. And overall, through to now the end of October, there is around 10-11% reduction in these notifications, which are likely to reflect a similar fold change in the number of cancer diagnoses. So we're estimating that with a total period of at least 6 months, that there's probably 3,000 plus cancer cases with delayed diagnosis in Victoria. And we've just seen this week, it looks like a surge is starting because these pathology notifications have now gone across the historical baseline. So it's a start of a surge end of October in Victoria, anticipating that will be ongoing, and that'll challenge our health system. And sadly, some of those patients are likely to have stage migration and have worse outcomes.
Yes, I think we've seen it's about 3,000 patients or more. Have we seen any differences in tumour type or geographic location or socioeconomic disadvantage in those populations?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. Don't you love the thing about data? It brings you back to reality. You think you can predict everything based on first principles, but the data is often different. So with that in mind, what does the data show? Well, interestingly, prostate cancer has dropped the most and has stayed down and seems to be almost getting worse as the months go by, and absolutely no signs of recovery. So that is being hit the hardest. And then lung cancer has hardly been affected at all, with virtually no change, which is very interesting as to why. And one might speculate that because of respiratory symptoms that obviously tend to come with lung cancer, that those patients were still presenting and getting diagnosed in the health system, where prostate cancer is the opposite, where PSA testing and presenting with chronic symptoms to general practitioners in the first instance have led to very, very significant reduction. So it's not equal by cancer types. Head and neck cancer early was reduced a lot by almost 40%, but has started to come back up. And there's also reductions in breast cancer, in colorectal cancer, in melanoma. So other than lung, 4 of those top 5 cancers have all been affected. Now, you also raised some really interesting questions about other factors. So what is really interesting, this gets to my point about see the data and you get surprises. We all anticipated that perhaps it might be the lower socioeconomic groups in our society where there might be greatest impact, but actually it's the opposite. It's actually the high socioeconomic groups that have had the biggest reduction in these pathology notifications. And so we can only speculate what that is, but it's perhaps likely due to the fact that people in higher socioeconomic groups have been more concerned about COVID, less mobile, less likely to get to their GP or have their screening tests, and more data will obviously be needed on that. And then there's the interesting question about geographic location, close to your heart, of course, Craig, and in fact to all of us, because we have throughout Australia, we have a regional and rural disparity in cancer outcomes with worse survival rates. But interestingly, with COVID, at least in Victoria, which is different to other states, of course, in not having so much remote and rural, but more regional classified populations, little bit less than metropolitan Melbourne where COVID hit hard, but not that different. And so it seems to have affected both metro and regional, maybe a bit less in the more outer regional and rural areas than the inner regional. It seems to be affected across the state, but not disproportionately. So regional disadvantage hasn't borne out here, or the converse, metro Melbourne be worse because of the greater impact of COVID and restrictions that were tighter for longer. But it looks pretty similar when one looks through the whole 6-month period of the number of reduced pathology notifications.
So the implications might be on worse outcomes in terms of survival down the track, but there's also possibly implications on resourcing with the later presentations. I think there's been some work done as well in that space.
Yeah, so there's definitely some concerns about the resourcing, and particularly the areas of concern are in the oncologist domain, getting patients to their adjuvant systemic therapies, having sufficient capacity in oncology nursing to deliver the treatments in the day oncology centres, or look as though that is going to be a challenge. And so every health service in Victoria should be thinking, and other health services elsewhere should think as well, as to strategies to try to cope with increased demand as we move into 2021 and throughout 2021. There is likely to be some stage migration. That's harder to model. The one interesting modelling that we have done in my area of melanoma, which is intriguing disease, of course, because you often can get a history from the patient about the rate of change or when a lesion on the skin changed. And then if you look at the thickness of the melanoma as the major prognostic factor, you can actually come up with a surrogate rate of growth of the melanoma. And based on that and the assumptions on stage migration, is thought to be a 6-month delay would lead to a 32% of stage 1 melanomas getting upstage to stage 2, which has significant implications for survival. But that probably is going to occur in other cancers as well.
Yeah, well, I think the Unintended Consequences Committee has looked at all this, and on the presumption that people are sicker, they're likely to use more resources, more allied health support. If you think about the head and neck cancers, for example, they're more advanced, they might need more dietetic intervention, egg tubes, etc. So I think it will, unfortunately, we might feel like we're going back in time a little bit to an oncology scene of several years ago.
I've got a question. Grant, do you know, is the same data and same pattern available in the other states or any other states?
Yeah, no, that's a really important question. Not the same sort of data. So there's not this close to real-time pathology notifications. So you have to wait longer for the data from other states. However, we do have Medicare benefit schedule data that Cancer Australia has now published for all the major cancers. And most recently, the report that just came out this month, which looked at prostate procedures and lung procedures, they're able to actually look at the differences between the states, which of course is interesting given the more prolonged lockdowns that occurred in Victoria versus all the other states. So basically what that data shows us is, to summarise it, and it's a bit of an oversimplification, but most states were recovering by June, but Victoria's gone beyond that because of almost certainly the extended lockdowns and people not getting their tests done and getting to their GPs. So, yes, Victoria, I think, is going to be hit harder than the other states. However, there was a period of, particularly through April and May, when diagnostic procedures for breast cancer, colonoscopies, lung cancer procedures, PSA testing, prostate MRIs, prostatic biopsies were down nationally for a couple of months. So hopefully that won't have major impact, but, Victoria might take the brunt, unfortunately, because of the need for extended lockdowns to get the virus under control.
So, Grant, what do you think we need to do? What are the plans to try and manage this, or what are your thoughts on that? One of the concerns for me is just around the timing. We're coming into the sort of Christmas and holidays, surgical shutdown and people taking leave. So it's actually bad timing in a number of ways. We're coming out of the surge, which is great, but I think there's going to be a lot of issues for us to manage in the next few months.
Your point on the timing, Craig, is a very good one. And I think a lot of our colleagues really need a holiday too. So I don't think people are going to be working through the summer period at all. People are really going to feel like they need a break. So that is an issue. But the sort of things we need to do, so, health services do need to plan for the need for additional surgical lists. The day oncology is going to be challenged. And you've raised the very difficult issue about allied health as well, where, many health services, I think, are already underbaked in allied health. And as we know from trying to get clinical research studies done in allied health is hard. The allied health staff are just under the pump at the best of times. So I think, yes, we've got challenges, and to try to build some estimate of predicted demand in health services with the assistance of health departments is vital, and extra resources are going to need to be available. So in Victoria, given the more prolonged nature of the likely reduction in cancer diagnoses, there is a bid in for the Victorian state budget for some extra resources, but there is likely to be an increased demand and resources that are going to happen nationally because of these delayed diagnoses.
Yeah, and the inevitable consequences of that is in other sectors such as elective surgery for non-cancer care. I think there'll be some knock-on effects going forward.
Just, Craig, one other comment to make too. So I haven't mentioned radiation oncology. So, one of the really interesting things with COVID is how the radiation oncologists have responded by delivering with lower number of fractions for their treatments, which has taken some demand off the system. So they seem to have been able to adapt. However, there will be some cancers where they have a surge as well. I mean, head and neck cancer would be the clear one where we know there's been a reduction in pathology notifications and diagnoses, and there are long and complicated treatments. So I think that will hit radiation oncology as well, but they have made some adjustments where there's real equipoise on the quality of outcome for patients to deliver fewer fractions, which I think is, in perpetuity, might actually be a good thing for patients and for the health system.
I agree. We'll bring Eva in here because this is probably a subject close to her heart. So this might be one of the positive unintended consequences of COVID, and we might talk about some of the things we want to keep from COVID, but that's the shorter courses may not necessarily be a bad thing. And Dorothea Keefe has talked about that in Cancer Australia, that maybe we need to look at the whole paradigm of funding for radiotherapy.
Oh, you're trying to make me be controversial. Look, I think we should go by the evidence, but where it cuts both ways, why not? And we have a system that in radiation incentivizes longer treatment, and there is less quick adoption of clinical trial data into real world. We've seen that for many years with adjuvant breast radiation getting progressively shorter, and yet the uptake varying widely around Australia and varying according to the setting of the treatment. But I wanted to ask, Grant, what are you hearing from your colleagues in Europe and in America? Is there just such mass devastation from COVID that cancer's off the agenda altogether? And are there any lessons from their quiet summer that has now exploded that we need to learn, not so much in relation to COVID, but in our planning for cancer?
Yeah, look, they have been hit incredibly hard. You know, I mentioned earlier that, so for Victoria, we think the hardest hit jurisdiction in Australia based on the Medicare benefit schedule data that we're only, I hesitate to use that word, to a large number of patients, but you're talking around that 10, 11% reduction in cancer diagnoses. But data coming from Europe, UK, North America, you're talking 20 to 40% reduction. I mean, it's huge. And what we're thinking about with our surge is going to be magnified in those jurisdictions. They've been quite innovative in keeping care going when there's all these restrictions in the health services and working out, you know, what the best needs are for patients and prioritising care. I think they've been forced to do that. However, what really worries me in those jurisdictions is we're seeing a surge and they're perhaps going to have a tsunami.
We're going to do a few quick questions here now. For those who don't know what the VCCC is, could you tell us in 30 seconds or less what is the VCCC?
Yep, so the Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre is an alliance of 10 members that come together to collaborate in cancer control. And I could list them, but that would take a long time. It's actually also the name of a building adjacent to Royal Melbourne Hospital and the University of Melbourne, so that causes a bit of confusion. But the entity that I lead is the Alliance organisation.
So it's an alliance of academic, clinical and research institutions, and Albury Wodonga Health and Bendigo Health are piloting becoming associate members. So for the first time, it's extending out to regional Victoria as well, which is absolutely fantastic. So there's a little disclaimer there. I've got a vested interest and I'm also the regional lead. It's been an amazing privilege to have that role. I've been actually shocked at the quality of the work and the service improvement work that we've been able to do, and pleasantly surprised at the level of resourcing and expertise that can be utilised in various programs. I've seen a number of strengths of the VCCC. What do you see as the main strengths?
Oh, look, it's bringing researchers and clinicians and educators together in a critical mass that, you know, any one institution can't have. I think that's very powerful way of ultimately improving the outcome for patients. And, you know, to think going forward about how can that principle be extended out across the state more systematically in Victoria, but also, you know, potential models elsewhere in Australia as well, I think is well worthy of consideration.
Yeah, I'm going to dress up in a koala suit and campaign for putting the Victoria back in the V.
I knew you were going to say that, Grant. We talked about the strengths. What do you think some of the weaknesses or gaps, or maybe that issue about coming statewide? You
know, for some people, it's hard work, right, having to deal with multiple institutions and trying to bring people together. It can be challenging. What I've found is that you just have to have the right type of people that will work in that alliance collaborative environment, and then it becomes a lot better. But it is difficult for some people to work in that multi-institutional alliance collaborative model. So that's a weakness. The other weakness, of course, and, I'm looking and thinking about Eva here at Monash Health, there's always limitation on resources, and you can do more if you have more resources. If this model is delivering the goods, which we think we're starting to do, then it needs better resourcing.
So where to next for the VCCC? We're waiting to hear funding announcement, but for the next program tranche of work. But what do you see as the main priorities, or what would you see as your legacy achievements in the time ahead?
So, look, I think the VCCC member institutions, the research institutes and the University of Melbourne and the hospitals, are very strong in biomedical research and early phase clinical trials, and that needs to continue because that's a bedrock of improving science-driven outcomes for patients. But really what I'm now most excited about is some of the new endeavours, collectively taking on the problems of equity in poor outcomes for different populations with cancer, whether it be Indigenous Victorians and Australians, culturally and linguistically diverse groups, regional groups. Craig, I think, is very important. We have issues there. So that's one new thing that I'm very excited about. I'll mention two other things. One is thinking about value-based healthcare. Eva mentioned earlier about the value, for example, around large number of fractions for radiotherapy, and actually thinking about getting true value that is defined by patients and having that strong patient voice. Craig, I really hope that that will be a legacy that the VCCC can deliver for Victorians, leading to value-based care that's with strong input from patients and consumers. And then really the third and final thing, I think we're on the wave of using new technology for education and learning a lot more efficiently. And in fact, we're participating in some of that technology right now as we speak, but really trying to develop world-leading programs there so that we can extend learning to individuals across the whole sector. I'm really excited that the only cancer oncology specialist in the Solomon Islands is able to undertake remote learning through the VCCC. I reckon that is just amazing that you can take the expertise of centres out to people wherever they happen to be, even if it's in remote island nations. They're the sort of things I'd like to see happen, and that we are going to invest with funding if we get the funding into these initiatives.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's low-hanging fruit, isn't it? It's something that we haven't really tackled as well as we could have in using the technology for education.
Absolutely. And I think where COVID has given us real opportunities there, and it needs to accelerate, because when busy clinical people that want more training and want a more qualification to move their careers forward, it's very hard to take time out from your clinical role and go to a university that might be a long way from where you live. So let's do it all remotely, and I'm very excited about that.
And your favourite VCCC current program, and you don't have to say Charles, but
that's, Eva asked me before about my kids. That's like asking me, who's my favourite kid, Craig. I can't do that. I can't possibly have a favourite. But let me put it this way. If in 5 years I hope that I'll look back and I'll say I'm really very proud if we can help solve this problem, that no matter where you land in the health system, you're going to get great care. If we can deliver that, that would be truly wonderful.
Fantastic. So on that note, Eva, do you have any other questions?
I have a final question for Grant, and it goes like this. What is the most embarrassing moment that the reporter Grant McArthur featured in and someone thought was you?
So particularly for our listeners outside of Victoria, the lead health reporter for the Herald Sun in Victoria, his name is Grant McArthur. And I've got to know him well as a delightful guy, very strong advocate for patients. So it's a pleasure to work with him. But interestingly, to share the same name. So the most embarrassing moment, more for him than me, is that I'm sitting in my office one day and the phone rings and I pick it up, and this is my namesake's father ringing him up to wish him a happy birthday, which was quite embarrassing for him. But there were a number of colleagues actually that thought I was writing these articles in the Herald Sun, and they would be polite and say, "Oh, I like your articles." And then I have to point out that, in fact, they're not by me. And, in fact, my namesake did request to his editor. We'd both decided it'd be great to put a little disclaimer on the bottom of cancer articles saying this is not written by Professor Grant McArthur. But the editors weren't keen to put that in, unfortunately, which is a shame because it continues to this day. Some people think I'm writing those articles.
I think I was one of them when I moved to Victoria. I thought, wow, this is sort of out there, front page by Grant McArthur. We better give him a professorship so that you remain indistinguishable. Grant, it's been a great pleasure. I hope our listeners have enjoyed getting to know you a little bit more and also to hear the very interesting and urgent and disturbing analysis about what we face in the next few months in Victoria and broadly in Australia. Final word to you, Professor Craig Underhill.
Thanks, Grant. Thanks for coming on the show. It's been great to talk about a serious topic, but also get to know you a little bit more as well. So thanks very much for your time.
Hey, Craig, I've got an idea. Let's pretend we're not the journalists on the podcast either. It's that other Craig Underhill and other Eva Segalov.
Okay.
So you could be even more controversial, both of you. That would be, that would be fun.
That's not in our making.
Don't know what you're talking about. It's been a lovely interview, and one of the real pleasures of speaking to people like Grant is the amount of area you can cover with not just expertise, but real experience and warmth and humour. So thank you, Grant, and I think you do a really good job as a ghostwriter for the Herald Sun, but you do a particularly good job as head of the VCCC, and I think all of us want to see this transition to equity sooner rather than later. There are a number of reasons why it's harder to do than you think, than it should be. In some ways, Craig, you call it low-hanging fruit, but the fruit's stuck on the tree. It's not that easy to pick.
No, absolutely. And, a lot of the low-hanging fruit's been done in Victoria. And, I've been, for example, in the Integrated Cancer Service program since day one. And the runs on the board they were able to achieve in the first few years, now it's much harder because you've done the easy stuff, you've got to do the hard stuff. So I think that's probably one of the challenges for the VCCC. In some ways, they've probably done a lot of the easy stuff already and now it's doing the hard stuff.
Yeah, no, I think Craig's exactly right, but we've got to do the hard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right? All those patients with poor outcomes of cancer, we need to do the hard stuff to help those patients. And so let's do it together is my rally.
And you used the word tsunami before, the cancer tsunami that will be faced in the Northern Hemisphere especially. But, we've got to remember that we've got the COVID pandemic. The WHO declared the cancer pandemic in 1999. This pandemic is now crashing upon us with ageing population, increased aged population in the third world especially, seeing issues managing cancer. And that pandemic's going to go on beyond our lifetime. It'll go well into the middle of the century and beyond current expectations. So we may look back at COVID as a little blip on the road, but there's a lot more to do to try and improve cancer outcomes.
I think that's great last words, Craig. I couldn't agree more.
So on that note, over and out. Thank you very much and see you next time at Oncology Journal Club podcast. Thanks, Rach. Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Grant.
Bye, everybody.
You've been listening to the Oncology Podcast. If you enjoyed today's edition and would like to subscribe, head over to our website, oncologynews.com.au, and sign up to our newsletter. Thanks for listening.